Exactly 18 days after my husband's car plunged off a Seattle cliff, his brother dropped legal papers on my glass table, demanding I vacate my home in 48 hours. I did not scream or cry. I simply poured more wine and smiled. He had no idea he just locked himself inside the invisible cage I built 1 week prior. Before I explain how his greed sent him to federal prison, comment your city below. Let the game begin. Welcome back to James' Revenge Stories, my wonderful listeners. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to operate and support our hardworking team. If you find today's story captivating, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our staff can pay their living expenses and continue bringing you these thrilling tales. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or clicking the PayPal link in the description and pinned comment below. My name is Harper. I am 38 years old, and right now the silence in my Seattle mansion is deafening. It had only been a handful of days since the funeral of my husband David. The heavy scent of white lilies and wilted roses still clung to the dark velvet curtains of our living room, a suffocating, lingering reminder of the sudden tragedy. The house felt cavernous, entirely stripped of his warmth and laughter, leaving behind an echoing, unbearable emptiness. I sat motionless in the center of the expansive room, cradling a half-empty glass of deep red vintage wine, staring out at the relentless rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. The gloomy Seattle weather perfectly matched the cold, hollow cavern my chest had become. Suddenly, the heavy oak front door clicked and swung inward. There was no polite knock. There was no respectful pause to acknowledge the mourning period. Leather soles echoed sharply and disrespectfully against the imported marble foyer. It was Julian David's younger brother, accompanied by his notoriously haughty girlfriend, Chloe. Julian strutted into my living room wearing an obnoxiously expensive custom-tailored suit that looked like it belonged on a high-fashion runway rather than in a house of grieving. A suffocating wave of heavy, musky designer cologne preceded him, completely overpowering the delicate, mournful scent of the funeral flowers. He wore an expression of sheer, unadulterated smugness. His chin tilted up as if he owned the very air he breathed. Chloe trailed closely behind him, her sharp high heels clicking aggressively and rhythmically against the polished hardwood floors. She wore a tight designer dress that left little to the imagination and carried an oversized, ostentatious luxury handbag, looking entirely out of place amidst the quiet, respectful grief of my home. Without a single word of condolence or a glance of sympathy, Julian marched directly to the glass coffee table right in front of me. He carelessly tossed a thick stack of legal documents onto its pristine surface. The heavy papers landed with a dull, authoritative thud that shattered the quiet atmosphere. "Let us not waste our precious time playing the weeping widow Harper." Julian sneered, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. "David is gone, and as his only surviving blood relative, I am stepping in to take charge. I am taking full control of Novacore Solutions." Novacore Solutions was the highly successful technology firm David and I had built entirely from the ground up. We had poured our blood, sweat, and sleepless nights into that enterprise for 10 grueling years. I was the co-founder, the silent architect behind our most lucrative software patents. Yet Julian spoke with the unearned confidence of a man who believed he had birthed the entire empire himself. Furthermore, Julian continued, smoothly adjusting his expensive silk tie with a sickeningly arrogant smirk, "This mansion is far too large and ridiculously expensive to maintain for a single woman with no real corporate income. I am putting it on the real estate market immediately. I already have brokers lining up." While Julian delivered his grand rehearsed speech, Chloe did not even bother to make eye contact with me. She was already wandering around the perimeter of the spacious room, holding up her sleek, gold-plated smartphone. The camera shutter clicked repeatedly, echoing like gunshots in the quiet room. She was shamelessly taking inventory, snapping pictures of my antique porcelain vases, the abstract oil paintings David and I had purchased on our 5th anniversary in Italy, and even the vintage silver jewelry box resting casually on the marble mantel. "This vase will fetch a rather decent price at auction," Chloe muttered to herself, her voice a sharp, annoying pitch that grated on my nerves. Though the interior decor in here is honestly a bit depressing and outdated. Who buys dark mahogany wood anymore? Julian leaned forward over the glass table, planting his manicured hands firmly on the surface to assert his physical dominance. Here is the harsh reality of your situation, Harper. You have until Sunday evening to pack your personal clothing and get out of my property. I have already secured a modest, affordable apartment for you out in the deep suburbs. Consider it a generous family favor. It will be a quiet little place for you to rest and get your fragile, shattered mind back together. He stared down at me, his eyes gleaming with the predatory thrill of someone kicking a wounded animal while it was bleeding out. He desperately expected tears. He expected me to fall to my knees to beg for mercy, to scream about fairness, the law, and the countless years of hard work I had invested into our shared company and our beautiful home. He wanted a messy, emotional reaction to feed his incredibly fragile ego. I looked down at the intimidating legal documents. I looked over at Chloe, who was now audaciously holding one of my grandmother's pearl necklaces up to the chandelier light. Finally, I looked back up at Julian's incredibly smug, punchable face. I did not raise my voice a single decibel. I did not let a single tear breach my eyelashes. Instead, I let a soft, eerily gentle smile touch the corners of my mouth. I lifted my crystal glass, taking a slow, highly deliberate sip of the rich wine. The liquid burned a pleasant, fiery trail down my throat, keeping me perfectly grounded in reality. "Of course, Julian," I said, my tone perfectly even, dripping with a thick, artificial sweetness that masterfully masked the absolute venom coursing through my veins. "If you truly believe that is what is best for the future of the company and for preserving David's legacy, I will absolutely not stand in your way. I will have all my bags packed by Sunday evening." Julian blinked rapidly, momentarily taken aback by my complete and utter surrender. He had prepared for a massive fight. Then the brief surprise melted into an expression of pure, triumphant delight. He straightened his posture, puffing his chest out like a victorious rooster. He truly believed he had won the war in a single battle. He genuinely thought the profound grief of losing my husband had entirely shattered my spirit, reducing me to a pathetic, submissive shell of a woman incapable of fighting back. "I'm very glad we understand each other so easily," he scoffed, turning sharply on his heel. "Come along, Chloe. The dead air in here is entirely too depressing." As the heavy oak front door finally slammed shut behind them, leaving me completely alone once more in the echoing house, my sweet smile instantly vanished, replaced by a perfectly cold, calculating line. Julian thought he was the apex predator, effortlessly taking over the territory. He did not realize he had just walked completely blind into a reinforced trap, and by Sunday evening I was going to systematically strip him of every single thing he thought he owned. The moment the engine of Julian's absurdly loud sports car faded down the driveway, I dropped my crystal wine glass into the kitchen sink. I did not waste a single second pretending to grieve anymore. I bypassed the main grand staircase and headed straight for the reinforced door in the hallway, sliding my right thumb over the hidden biometric scanner I had personally installed. The heavy steel door clicked open, revealing the cold concrete stairs that led to my private subterranean sanctuary. While David was always the charismatic public face of our technology company, I was the paranoid, obsessive security architect. Approximately 6 months ago, when David first started having secretive late-night meetings with his brother, my survival instincts had flared up intensely. I had secretly wired his entire home office with microscopic high-definition lenses hidden inside the smoke detectors and bookshelf corners. I sat down at the glowing multi-monitor workstation and rapidly pulled up the encrypted server logs. My fingers danced across the mechanical keyboard as I rewound the security timeline to exactly 1 hour before Julian had swaggered into my living room with his arrogant demands. There on the crisp digital feed was my allegedly grieving brother-in-law. He was not mourning David. He was frantically and violently tearing through David's heavy mahogany desk. I watched with absolute cold detachment as Julian's trembling hands finally located a hidden biometric safe beneath the floorboards. He pulled a small silicone mold from his pocket and pressed it against the scanner. It was a perfect replica of David's fingerprint. My stomach churned with disgust as I realized he must have prepared that mold while identifying his own brother's body at the city morgue. Yet my eyes remained completely fixed on the glowing screen. The safe hissed open. Julian eagerly reached inside and pulled out two highly specific items, a black titanium electronic security token and a notarized master copy of my physical signature. The puzzle pieces snapped together in my mind, instantly forming a horrifying picture. Julian was not just trying to steal a luxury house or claim a temporary executive title to stroke his ego. He was meticulously planning a hostile, highly illegal corporate liquidation. To completely bypass the board of directors and legally sell the core artificial intelligence patents of our company, he needed dual authorization. He needed my cryptographic token and my authentic signature. He was going to sell our life's work to our biggest corporate rival in exchange for $4 million in pure, untraceable cash. I grabbed my dark trench coat and slipped out through the side garage door. The drive to downtown Seattle was a rapid blur of gray rain and slick, dangerous asphalt. I deliberately parked 3 blocks away from an unmarked vintage brick building and slipped inside through a rusty service elevator to avoid any cameras. Waiting for me in a dimly lit, heavily soundproofed office was Marcus. Marcus was not just an ordinary lawyer. He was a brilliant corporate fixer, the ruthless man David and I trusted with our deepest business secrets. He took the titanium token and the signature template, I stated flatly as I sat down in the deep leather chair across from his desk. Marcus did not look the least bit surprised by this revelation. He let out a long, heavy sigh, taking off his wire-rimmed glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose in frustration. "I warned David about Julian's dangerous extracurricular activities, Harper. It is significantly worse than we initially thought." Marcus reached over and turned his large computer monitor toward me. Complex lines of encrypted financial tracking data scrolled rapidly across the dark screen. Julian has been aggressively trading unregistered cryptocurrency on shady offshore exchanges for the last 8 months. He genuinely thought he was a financial genius. He was actually the easy mark. He lost absolutely everything, and then, in his desperation, he borrowed heavily from violent people who do not ever use legal collection agencies. They use brutal physical violence. Julian is currently underwater to the tune of $4 million. The absolute deadline to pay his underground creditors is this Friday morning. If he does not wire that exact amount to their accounts by sunrise, he is a dead man walking. So that was the terrifying fire burning under Julian's sudden aggressive corporate takeover. He was not just fueled by ordinary greed. He was a cornered, desperate rat frantically trying to save his own life by illegally selling off my hard-earned empire. Marcus reached deep into the inner pocket of his tailored blazer and pulled out a heavy, intricately carved brass key. He slid it slowly across the polished oak desk toward me. The key stopped right at the edge of my fingertips. "David knew his brother was rapidly spiraling out of control," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low, incredibly serious register. "He also knew that if anything sudden and tragic happened to him, Julian would come after the estate like a starving vulture. Therefore, David quietly established a completely insulated, untraceable trust fund entirely in your name. There are exactly $2 million resting quietly in an untouchable offshore account. Furthermore, this specific key belongs to a fully self-sustaining, off-grid smart farm located out in the deep, isolated valleys of Montana. The property deed is legally buried under 5 complex layers of phantom shell corporations. It is completely invisible to federal databases' tax audits, and most importantly, it is entirely invisible to Julian." I slowly picked up the heavy brass key. The cold metal felt like a solid, unbreakable anchor in the middle of a raging hurricane. David had protected me even from beyond the grave. A profound, icy sense of clarity washed over my entire body. "We need to call the federal authorities immediately," Marcus urged, leaning forward with urgency in his eyes. "With the high-definition security footage of him explicitly stealing the token, we can have the police arrest him for felony burglary and attempted corporate espionage tonight." "No," I replied instantly, my voice as hard and unyielding as a diamond. If we call the police right now, he gets a minor slap on the wrist for breaking and entering. He will falsely claim he was simply securing company assets as a deeply concerned family member. He will hire a slick, expensive defense attorney and drag me through the civil court system for 10 long years. I looked down at the brass key in my palm, then slowly looked back up to meet Marcus's gaze. I want him to use that titanium token. I want him to brazenly forge my signature on those critical federal trade documents. I want him to officially initiate the $4 million international wire transfer. Let him commit absolute, undeniable high-level federal wire fraud. We are going to let him dig his own massive grave, Marcus. And once he jumps in, I am going to eagerly bury him alive. Through Marcus's extensive underground intelligence network, I discovered the final cowardly piece of Julian's pathetic exit strategy. He had absolutely no intention of paying back those violent underground creditors. That Friday morning deadline was nothing more than a desperate smokescreen to force the immediate liquidation of my company. Instead, he and Chloe had secretly booked 2 first-class one-way tickets to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, scheduled to depart exactly 2 hours after the $4 million hit his designated account. Brazil notoriously lacked a straightforward extradition treaty with the United States for high-level financial crimes. His plan was despicable, but structurally sound. He would leave me completely homeless, let the loan sharks tear apart whatever remained of David's estate, and sip expensive cocktails on a sunny South American beach. But a predator only attacks when he feels completely secure in his absolute dominance. I needed Julian to believe I was entirely defenseless, a broken, naive widow with absolutely zero resources left to fight him. I knew for a fact that Julian had infected my personal smartphone with a highly invasive military-grade spyware application. He had most likely installed it during the chaotic, blurry days leading up to the funeral, perhaps when he pretended to be a supportive brother helping me organize the catering contacts for the reception. To spring my trap perfectly, I needed to feed his monstrous ego and trigger his underlying paranoia simultaneously. Sitting entirely alone in the shadowy study of my soon-to-be-stolen mansion, I opened my secure banking application. I navigated to my primary household checking account, which held a meager balance of just over $1,000. With deliberate, agonizing slowness, I initiated a wire transfer for exactly $1,000, sending it directly to an independent solar panel repairman located in rural Montana. It was a highly calculated breadcrumb. I knew the spyware on my device would instantly flag this sudden, out-of-state transaction and alert Julian. The response was almost instantaneous. The high-resolution screen of my phone flickered slightly, a telltale sign of a remote administrative override protocol being activated. I placed the device flat on the heavy mahogany desk, folded my hands in my lap, and watched the digital massacre unfold. Julian was a greedy amateur, but he possessed enough rudimentary hacking skills to follow a digital trail. He saw the Montana transaction and undoubtedly panicked instantly, assuming I was trying to hide remaining assets, or worse, hire an out-of-state private investigator to look into his shady dealings. In his frantic mind, he had to neutralize the threat immediately. He could not risk me retaining aggressive legal counsel or filing a sudden emergency injunction to halt the corporate sale. I watched completely detached and strangely fascinated as an unseen digital hand navigated aggressively through my banking application. The cursor moved with erratic, greedy speed, completely bypassing the standard security protocols using the biometric data he had previously stolen from the safe. He did not just stop at the household checking account. He ruthlessly targeted my private emergency savings account. This was the ultimate safety net I had maintained entirely separate from David's corporate wealth. A secure fund containing exactly $35,000. It was the hard-earned money I had saved from my very first independent software consulting jobs long before Novacore Solutions became a massive empire. The numbers on the glowing screen began to plummet rapidly. Julian initiated a rapid, unverified international wire transfer. He was draining every single cent. He routed the entire $35,000 through a complex, dizzying maze of encrypted digital wallets, eventually dumping it into an untraceable, empty offshore shell account. He was systematically cutting off all my potential legal avenues, ensuring I would not have a single penny left to hire a lawyer, rent a cheap hotel room, or even buy a decent meal. He wanted me completely financially paralyzed and utterly dependent on his false mercy. The entire digital theft took less than 4 agonizing minutes. When the screen finally stopped flickering, my banking dashboard refreshed itself. The bright white font starkly displayed my new available balance, $0. To any normal person, watching their entire life savings evaporate into the digital ether would induce a massive panic attack. A normal grieving widow would be screaming in terror, throwing the phone against the wall, or desperately dialing the bank fraud department. I sat perfectly still in the engulfing darkness of the study. The pale blue light from the smartphone screen illuminated my face. I did not feel a single ounce of fear or panic. Instead, a slow, dark smirk stretched across my lips, breaking the icy mask I had worn for days. Julian thought he had just delivered the final fatal blow to my independence. He firmly believed he had outsmarted me and secured his flawless, undeniable victory. He was entirely oblivious to the monumental, catastrophic mistake he had just made. By using stolen biometric data to remotely drain a personal bank account across state lines and routing the stolen funds internationally, Julian had just elevated his actions from a simple civil dispute over a family inheritance to a high-level, undeniable federal cyber theft. He had just handed me the exact, irrefutable digital fingerprints required by the authorities. The bait was taken, and the invisible steel jaws of my trap were now snapping firmly shut. It was time to utilize the $2 million David had quietly hidden away for me. I did not need to actually spend a single penny of it. I simply needed to use its massive financial weight to force the heavy gate-kept doors of institutional banking to swing wide open in my favor. Early Wednesday morning, while Julian was likely sleeping off a hangover in his luxury apartment, I bypassed my usual local bank branches and drove straight to the towering glass and steel skyscraper that housed the regional headquarters of the Central Clearing Bank. This was the exact financial institution Julian had foolishly designated as the receiving hub for the $4 million corporate buyout. He had chosen it specifically because of its high-speed international wire capabilities, entirely unaware that massive, verified wealth brings a very specific kind of executive VIP access that ordinary retail clients never even see. With Marcus legally representing my interests by my side, I was quickly escorted past the crowded public lobbies and directly into the soundproof mahogany-paneled office of the bank's senior executive director. The director, a highly serious man with sharp features and an impeccably tailored dark suit, carefully reviewed the thick leather binder Marcus placed onto his polished desk. Inside were the original corporate charters, the unalterable biometric security logs from my basement server, and the heavily authenticated trust documents proving my absolute authority. I presented the undeniable, legally binding proof that I was the sole unencumbered owner and primary intellectual property holder of Novacore Solutions. The forged transfer documents and the fake signature Julian had submitted to the purchasing corporation were admittedly sophisticated, but against the raw, unadulterated foundation of my authentic corporate lineage, they were nothing more than fragile paper lies. My brother-in-law is currently attempting a fraudulent, highly illegal liquidation of my primary intellectual property assets, I explained in a perfectly calm, level tone, leaning back comfortably into the plush leather chair. He expects an international wire transfer of exactly $4 million to land in a designated holding account within your specific institution by 9 o'clock this coming Friday morning. He fully intends to immediately route those stolen funds out of the country through the SWIFT international banking network to South America. The bank director frowned deeply. His hands steepled together beneath his chin as he fully grasped the severe legal implications. We can easily flag the incoming wire transfer and reject it entirely at the Federal Clearinghouse level, Mrs. Harper. We can forcefully bounce the funds right back to the purchasing corporation before the money ever officially hits his account. No, I replied sharply, my voice echoing with absolute icy authority in the quiet room. Rejecting the incoming wire will simply alert him that his massive forgery has been detected by the system. He will instantly panic scatter and potentially destroy the secondary digital evidence I desperately need to guarantee his federal prosecution. I do not want the money blocked. I want you to let the $4 million clear the central gateway seamlessly and deposit successfully into his designated holding account. Let him see the massive balance refresh on his digital dashboard. Let him taste the ultimate victory. But the exact microsecond that money officially lands, I want you to initiate a unilateral Level 5 hard fraud freeze. The director's eyebrows shot up toward his hairline in genuine surprise. A hard fraud freeze was the financial equivalent of dropping a concrete bunker over an account. It was a draconian, incredibly aggressive security measure rarely deployed outside of massive federal racketeering or anti-terrorism investigations. A hard fraud. Freeze, Marcus clarified smoothly. Filling the momentary silence with his sharp legal expertise means the financial current becomes strictly a one-way street. The capital can successfully enter the designated account, triggering all the standard automated deposit notifications and email alerts. However, the outgoing gateway is completely and permanently severed. Julian will not be able to withdraw a single physical dollar bill from an ATM. He will not be able to transfer a dime domestically, let alone execute an encrypted international wire to Brazil. The bank account instantly becomes a digital black hole, and the only possible way to lift a hard fraud freeze once it is actively deployed by the central system. It's for the verified legal account owner to appear in person inside this exact physical branch and sign the release documents in the physical presence of a certified bank officer and federal authorities. The director finished a slow, understanding nod dawning on his face. You are deliberately turning our bank into a high-security financial mousetrap. Exactly. I smiled coldly, looking him dead in the eyes. I want him securely trapped inside the very vault he built. While the digital walls were silently closing in on Julian downtown, I needed to ensure his physical escape route was equally and entirely compromised. Later that same Wednesday afternoon, the heavy front door of my mansion clicked open yet again. This time, it was just Chloe. She had brazenly returned to scavenge the property using the spare key Julian had undoubtedly copied without my permission. I was sitting quietly on the dining room floor, surrounded by several half-packed cardboard boxes, perfectly playing the pathetic role of the defeated, obedient widow, quietly preparing for my Sunday eviction. Chloe barely acknowledged my existence. She breezed right past me carrying an oversized, ridiculously expensive designer tote bag and headed straight for my master bedroom walk-in closet to greedily sift through my personal collection of imported silk scarves and high-end cosmetics. Crucially, she left her massive, heavily branded leather purse resting carelessly on the kitchen island. I stood up silently from the floor. Moving with the practiced, quiet grace of a phantom, I slipped unnoticed into the kitchen. From the deep pocket of my woven cardigan, I retrieved a micro GPS tracking transmitter. It was a tiny, flat device, no larger than a standard coat button, utilizing military-grade satellite telemetry. It was the exact same technology Novacore's security division utilized for tracking high-value top-secret server shipments across the globe. Working rapidly, I carefully peeled back a small section of the inner silk lining of Chloe's ostentatious luxury handbag. I slid the tiny black disc deep into the hidden bottom seam, pressed the industrial adhesive firmly into place, and expertly smoothed the fabric back down. The alteration was completely invisible. I was back in the dining room, taping up a cardboard box and looking entirely harmless just as I heard her sharp high heels clicking back down the marble hallway. She strutted past me, her arms completely full of my imported Italian cashmere sweaters, shot me a look of pure, unadulterated disgust, grabbed her heavily bugged purse, and marched out the front door without uttering a single syllable. A few minutes later, I walked down to my secure basement and pulled up the encrypted tracking software on my glowing monitor. A steady, pulsing red dot immediately illuminated the digital map steadily moving down the Seattle interstate toward Julian's luxury downtown apartment. Every single physical movement they made, every street they turned down, and every stoplight they waited at was now broadcasting directly to my secure server in real time. The invisible iron cage was now completely constructed and heavily fortified from all possible angles. His digital financial exit was permanently barricaded by the uncompromising weight of institutional banking laws. His physical geographic exit was tethered securely to my digital map. Yet, entirely ignorant of the massive impenetrable walls, slowly crushing inward around him, Julian was currently sitting in his expensive penthouse, smugly looking at his calendar, excitedly counting down the hours until Friday morning. He genuinely believed he was about to become a multimillionaire. He had absolutely no idea he was already a federal prisoner. Friday morning arrived wrapped in a thick, dreary fog. My phone buzzed at exactly 7 o'clock. It was Julian summoning me to a decaying, grease-stained diner on the far industrial side of the city. He deliberately chose a place that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old frying oil, a stark contrast to the luxurious restaurants he usually frequented. He wanted to humiliate me to visually emphasize how far I had fallen from my high society pedestal. I arrived wearing a plain, slightly oversized gray sweater and absolutely zero makeup, fully committing to the role of the utterly defeated widow. Julian was already seated in a cracked vinyl booth, wearing yet another sharply tailored Italian suit. He looked completely out of place, an arrogant king slumming it with the peasants. A sleek black leather briefcase rested heavily on the seat next to him. "Harper," he greeted me with a sickeningly fake smile as I slid into the booth opposite him. "You look terrible, but I suppose intense grief takes its toll on everyone." I kept my eyes downcast, nervously picking at a loose thread on my sleeve. "Why did you want to see me, Julian?" He sighed dramatically, leaning back and lacing his fingers together. "Despite our recent business disagreements, I am not a monster. You are still family, at least by marriage. I know things are incredibly tight for you right now, especially since you drained your own savings accounts for whatever foolish reasons." He reached into his designer wallet and pulled out a single, crisp $100 bill. He tossed it onto the sticky table, letting it flutter toward me. "Take this," he ordered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Buy yourself some cheap groceries. Stock up on canned beans and rice. It will help you stretch your non-existent budget when you move into the suburban apartment on Sunday. Consider it an act of sheer charity." I looked at the crumpled $100 bill resting next to the dirty sugar dispenser. The sheer audacity of the man was almost comical. He was actively stealing a multi-million-dollar technology empire from me, yet he wanted to play the magnanimous savior by tossing me a piece of loose change. I slowly picked up the bill, my hands trembling ever so slightly, in a perfectly rehearsed display of pathetic gratitude. "Thank you, Julian." "This is very generous. Actually, I am in a bit of a desperate bind today." "Oh." He raised an eyebrow, clearly enjoying my supposed misery. "Do share." "It is about David's private bank vault downtown," I murmured, my voice wavering perfectly. "I was supposed to retrieve the original property deeds for the house today, but I completely misplaced my biometric access card. The bank manager said standard protocol requires a full police presence to forcefully drill the safe open. I scheduled the police escort for 2 o'clock this afternoon. I just hope the procedure does not take too long." The smug, arrogant smile completely vanished from Julian's face in a fraction of a second. The blood drained rapidly from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly and pale beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of the diner. He knew exactly what was inside that specific bank vault. If the police drilled it open this afternoon, they would immediately discover that the master signature template and the titanium security token were missing. The entire federal investigation would launch before the corporate buyer's $4 million wire transfer even finished clearing the international banking gateways. 2 o'clock, Julian repeated, his voice suddenly tight and breathless. "You called the police for 2 o'clock today?" "Yes," I replied, innocently blinking at him. "Is there a problem?" No problem at all," he stammered abruptly, standing up. His perfectly styled hair suddenly looked slightly disheveled. Panic, raw and unadulterated, was radiating from every pore of his body. He checked his expensive gold watch frantically. It was nearing 8 in the morning. He needed to get to his secure terminal, ensure the $4 million landed at 9 o'clock sharp, and immediately push the funds to South America before the authorities stormed the bank vault. "I have a highly critical meeting," Julian blurted out, throwing a $20 bill on the table for the coffee he did not even drink. "I have to leave right now." He turned and practically sprinted out the glass doors of the diner, his expensive leather shoes slipping slightly on the greasy linoleum floor. He was moving with such blinding, desperate speed that he completely forgot the heavy black leather briefcase resting quietly in the vinyl booth. I watched his sports car tear out of the parking lot, squealing its tires loudly against the wet pavement. I took a deep, calming breath, sliding across the booth to sit right next to his abandoned briefcase. I snapped the golden clasps open. Inside sat his highly encrypted top-tier corporate laptop. I reached into the deep pocket of my gray sweater and pulled out a small metallic silver USB drive. Marcus had given this device to me just yesterday. It contained a vicious self-executing decryption algorithm designed by NovaCore's absolute best cybersecurity engineers. I flipped the laptop open, ignoring the complex password prompt on the screen, and jammed the silver drive into the side port. The screen instantly flickered black, then erupted into rapidly scrolling lines of green command code. I glanced at the diner wall clock. I knew Julian would realize his massive mistake the moment he reached his car or his penthouse. But the drive back here in morning traffic would take him at least 15 minutes. I only needed 3. For exactly 180 seconds, I sat completely still, listening to the soft whir of the laptop's internal cooling fan as the malware violently smashed through his firewall partitions. It bypassed his personal folders and aggressively cloned the entire hidden root directory directly onto my drive. When the progress bar hit 100%, a specific folder caught my eye. It was labeled with the exact name of NovaCore's employee health insurance provider. My blood ran cold as I quickly opened the cloned directory. There, explicitly laid out in pristine digital spreadsheets, was the undeniable proof. Julian had not just stolen my money. Over the past 8 months, he had been quietly siphoning hundreds of thousands of dollars directly from the medical insurance fund of our hard-working employees to cover his initial cryptocurrency gambling debts. He was stealing health care from pregnant secretaries and aging technicians. A deep, righteous fury replaced any lingering shred of mercy I might have unknowingly held. I safely ejected the silver USB drive, slipped it back into my sweater pocket, and closed the laptop. I calmly carried the heavy briefcase over to the front counter. "Excuse me," I said, offering the bored teenage waiter a polite smile. "My incredibly forgetful brother-in-law left this in our booth. He will probably come rushing back in here completely out of breath in about 10 minutes. Could you please hold on to it for him?" "Sure thing, lady," the waiter mumbled, tossing the expensive briefcase carelessly under the sticky counter. I walked out of the diner, breathing in the crisp, cold morning air. I slid into the driver's seat of my car, gripping the steering wheel tightly. I had the biometric logs. I had the international wire fraud trap set. I had the GPS tracker on his escape route. And now I held the absolute proof of his corporate embezzlement in the palm of my hand. The timer was counting down to 9 o'clock. It was time to pull the final lever and watch the heavy iron cage drop. At exactly 12 noon on Friday, the central clearing system of the bank officially processed the massive corporate buyout. $4 million successfully landed in the designated holding account. Miles away, inside the exclusive soundproof VIP departure lounge of the International Airport Terminal, Julian was sitting comfortably in a plush leather armchair. He was sipping an expensive glass of vintage champagne, completely relaxed, while Chloe browsed a luxury magazine beside him. His encrypted laptop sat open on the glass table. As the digital clock struck 12, his automated routing script instantly activated. The program attempted to immediately sweep the massive sum of money out of the country, pushing it toward the untraceable offshore accounts in Brazil. But the digital money hit a solid, impenetrable concrete wall. A glaring bright red error message violently flashed across his screen. The system screamed, "Transaction denied," followed by the terrifying code for a level 5 hard fraud freeze. Julian choked on his champagne. The crystal flute slipped from his trembling fingers, shattering against the expensive carpet. He knew exactly what that specific banking code meant. He knew that the only possible way to unfreeze those funds was for the legally verified account owner to physically walk into the bank and sign the release documents in person. Panic, raw and suffocating, completely consumed him. Without uttering a single word of explanation to Chloe, he jumped up, abandoned his luggage, and sprinted frantically out of the airport terminal, desperately hailing a taxi to speed back downtown. 30 minutes later, the heavy oak doors of the bank director's private office were violently kicked open. Julian practically fell into the room, his chest heaving uncontrollably, his expensive silk tie entirely askew, and his face drenched in a cold, terrified sweat. "Harper!" he screamed, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and sheer desperation. "You need to sign the release authorization right now. Do you have any idea what you have done? I will ruin you. I will leave you on the streets." He took 2 aggressive steps forward, raising his fist to intimidate me. Then he suddenly froze, his eyes widening in absolute horror. I was not sitting alone and crying in the corner. I was sitting comfortably at the head of the massive mahogany conference table, calmly sipping a cup of hot black tea. Sitting calmly to my right was Marcus, organizing a tall stack of legal folders. And standing perfectly still in the shadows of the room completely surrounding Julian were 4 federal agents from the Financial Crimes Division. They wore dark suits, their imposing federal badges gleaming brightly under the recessed lighting. I placed my teacup down with a soft, definitive click. "Julian," I said smoothly, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "Please meet Special Agent Reynolds. We have been having a fascinating conversation about your recent extracurricular activities." Julian could not breathe. His mouth opened and closed like a dying fish on a dry dock. I pushed the thick leather dossier across the table. "You see, Julian, you made several fatal miscalculations. You assumed I was broken, but while you were picking out your beach house in Rio, I was handing the authorities the high-definition basement security footage of you explicitly stealing my biometric token." Agent Reynolds stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "We also have the certified digital logs of you illegally transferring $35,000 across state lines into an international shell company," the agent stated coldly. "And thanks to the decrypted hard drive you conveniently left at a diner this morning, we have the complete, undeniable financial spreadsheets proving you embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Employee Medical Insurance Fund. You are facing over 20 years in a federal penitentiary." The sheer, crushing weight of reality finally shattered Julian's arrogant mind. His knees buckled instantly. The man who had strutted into my living room days earlier, acting like a supreme king, now collapsed onto the expensive carpet, sobbing uncontrollably. "It was not just me," Julian wailed loudly, pointing a desperately shaking finger toward the door. "It was Chloe. She planned the whole escape. She forced me to take the money. Please, I will give it all back. Just let me go." The cold, metallic click of the handcuffs snapping tightly around his wrists echoed with beautiful poetic justice throughout the quiet room. As if summoned by his pathetic betrayal, there was a sudden commotion outside the office doors. Chloe, who had tracked the GPS location of Julian's phone, burst into the bank lobby screaming his name and demanding to know why he had abandoned her at the airport. She did not even make it past the marble teller counters. 2 more undercover federal agents immediately intercepted her, pinning her arms behind her back. Because she had actively planned to flee the country with stolen federal funds, her passport was already flagged. She was immediately arrested as a primary accomplice to international wire fraud. I did not stay to watch them drag Julian away. I walked out of the towering glass building and stepped into the quiet, peaceful Friday afternoon. The dreary Seattle rain had finally cleared, giving way to a brilliant, warm sunlight that washed over the city streets. Before leaving the city limits, I sat down with Marcus one final time. I signed a permanent, irrevocable legal transfer. I donated 100% of my controlling shares in Novacor Solutions directly into a newly established employee charity trust. The very people who had built the company alongside David and me would now fully own it, ensuring their pensions and health insurance would never again be threatened by corporate greed. I climbed into my car and merged onto the eastbound highway. I drove for hours, leaving the towering skyscrapers and the painful memories far behind me. By the time the sun began to set, casting brilliant shades of purple and gold across the sky, I had crossed the state line into the vast open valleys of Montana. I pulled the car over beside a deep, crystal-clear alpine lake. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the old smartphone Julian had infected with his spyware, and hurled it as far as I could into the icy water. It sank instantly, taking the final tether of my old life down with it. I took a deep breath of the crisp, clean mountain air, smiled warmly at the empty horizon, and began my drive toward the smart farm, ready to start a completely free and invisible life. Thank you so much, my wonderful listeners, for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. I would love to know where you are listening from today, so please drop your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's story thrilling and satisfying, please consider helping us out. As I mentioned earlier, our channel is currently operating with zero budget. You can support our hardworking team with just $1 by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the PayPal donation link in the description and pinned comment. Your incredible generosity ensures our staff can feed their families and continue bringing you the absolute best revenge stories every single week. Until next time, stay safe and stay sharp.